Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Fleck, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm delighted to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Stop People Pleasing, Halting the Cycle of ADHD Self-Doubt, Perfectionism, and Procrastination. Leading today's presentation is Alan Brown. Alan is an ADHD coach and author. He created the award-winning ADD Crusher video program for teens and adults with ADHD. Alan's undiagnosed and untreated ADHD manifested in underachievement, substance use, and more. When he was finally diagnosed, he discovered strategies that fueled his successful advertising career and 2 startups. He also wrote Zen and the Art of Productivity. You can get his ebook, 5 Things We're Doing Every Day That Make Our ADHD Worse, at www.addcrusher.com. We all know what it feels like to grow up hearing constant criticism from educators, parents, coaches, and others who truly did not understand ADHD. Over time, that negativity turns into self-doubt and feelings that we're just not measuring up. Alan will share his strategies for how he overcame those internal struggles and how he manages the ADHD traits he finds most challenging. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking this poll question to our live audience. When you're in people-pleasing mode or self-doubt takes over, how do you move past this? Please select your answer and comment under the video player to tell us more. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you're curious about the articles we're working on for Attitude Magazine's upcoming spring issue, I'm happy to share a few. Attitude surveyed readers about the cost of ADHD care. They told us how much they pay annually for themselves and their children and what they do without to afford care. We're also working on a collection of articles about autism, from newly researched subtypes to masking and burnout. Plus, if you're so over your job, we're here to help. Our experts explain the career assessments that will help you find the right job and love it. Look for these and other articles in our upcoming spring issue, which hits readers' mailboxes in mid-February. If you're not yet a subscriber, visit attitudemag.com/subscribe or click the Subscribe Now tab on your screen. I have to share one more thing. I'm super excited about our summer issue because it's our first ever men's issue. It's all about the lived experiences of men with ADHD. It features revealing, authentic, and hopeful articles written by men, for men, and their loved ones. Even our guest speaker, Alan Brown, is a contributor. He writes about dealing with his dad's crushing criticism in childhood and his bumpy yet successful road to adulthood. That's all in the summer issue of Attitude Magazine, which comes out in May. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Inflow. People-pleasing can take over your life when you have ADHD. Self-doubt, perfectionism, and procrastination all feed into the same exhausting cycle. Inflow understands how overwhelming this feels. Our science-backed program, created by ADHD experts, teaches practical strategies to build confidence, set healthier boundaries, and break the patterns that keep you stuck. Click the link on your screen to take the free ADHD traits quiz to get started. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Alan Brown. Thank you so much for joining us today, Alan.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being here. I want to start by just sharing my goal for you today, which is to have a better understanding of the roots of our people-pleasing, perfectionism, self-doubt, and procrastination, their relationship to our ADHD-influenced self-esteem, and some simple ways we can begin to strengthen it today. If we can strengthen our self-esteem, we can reduce this perfectionism, people-pleasing, et cetera. And in service of that, let's talk about me. Let me back up. I'm so glad that Carol mentioned this article that I wrote and it'll be published in the spring issue or is it summer? I forget. But this is an article about the pain of growing up with ADHD. And this is how I describe myself across different periods of my youth. So I was the outsider, difficulty making friends. I never really felt included or belonging. I was the class clown. I was, of course, compensating for this, not feeling connected. And I was masking, in a way, dummy. That's what my alcoholic father called me. I was screwing up daily, it seemed. The approval seeker, which in high school, especially just growing up outside of Newark, New Jersey, hanging out with the cool, tough kids meant lots of risky business. And then, of course, more screw ups, lots more. Then, segueing into my young adult life, the people pleaser, making sure everybody else is happy so nobody can yell at me. And all of this both contributed to and resulted in my low self-esteem. And even today, I am overly deferential. I'm effusively thanking people for the smallest things. And by the way, if any of this resonates, I don't know, I think we've got a chat here, but please feel free to chime in if there is one. I hesitate or avoid asking for things. It's funny, even questions of a service provider whom I'm paying for fear that I'm taking up too much of their time, even knowing the question may be 100% legit. Everyone else, whether a doctor, a cashier, a colleague, or a complete stranger, somehow feels to me to be above me in authority, integrity, or worth. Does that resonate with anyone? I assume I'm the least smart person in the room. Why did they invite me? Here's a doozy. An underlying suspicion that maybe I'm not really a good person. And of course, here on this webinar, in the back of my mind, it's kind of deep back there, is the thought that I have no business being here. What why me? Little imposter syndrome. But is it any wonder that I have struggled with poor boundaries, perfectionism, fear of failure, etc.? Again, all this rooted in low self-esteem. So what exactly is self-esteem? Self-esteem is one's overall evaluation and perception of one's own abilities, qualities, and attributes, including the subjective judgment one holds about oneself. We're going to call those stories in terms of competence, likability, and adequacy across various domains of life. Low self-esteem involves low levels of self-respect, low self-acceptance, and a negative sense of worth and negative self-image, which is marked by self-doubt, self-criticism, or distorted perceptions about the self, which can lead to emotional distress and interpersonal difficulties. I know, it's fun, huh? Now, it's hard to imagine anyone having 100% healthy self-esteem. We know that successful, wealthy, famous, and generally happy people grapple with self-esteem issues. But we ADHDers are in a league of our own. So here's what I'll cover today. The ADHD low self-esteem connection, where self-esteem comes from and why it is worse for us. More about how it manifests and the significant costs to us. And then we get to the right one. 2 evidence-based exercises that will help us to begin strengthening our self-esteem. And stick around till the end for Q&A. I hope we have lots of time for Q&A. Plus, I'm going to share a quick note about my upcoming free Crush Your ADHD Virtual Summit, which starts next week. Okay, so what is the ADHD low self-esteem connection? A plethora of research has shown that adults with ADHD have lower levels of self-esteem compared to the general population. By the way, the same goes for ADHD children and adolescents. The more severe the ADHD, the lower the self-esteem will tend to be. And interestingly, undiagnosed ADHD adults will suffer more from low self-esteem than those who've been diagnosed. So let's discard that notion that getting diagnosed should be bad for our self-image. And the consequences of low self-esteem are pretty consequential, particularly for us, which we'll get into. But where does self-esteem, low or healthy, come from? And why is it worse for us? For starters, it comes from our DNA. Self-esteem is moderately heritable, and our DNA explains between 1/3 and 1/2 of the variation in our self-esteem. And though it's moderate in comparison to, say, ADHD, which has 70 to 80% heritability, it's still significant. And if you think about it, the heritability of self-esteem is worse for us because when you add the heritability of low self-esteem to that of having ADHD, it's kind of a double whammy. But of course, environmental factors reinforce or can mitigate any genetic predisposition. The environmental biggies start with family dynamics, whether we were supported or criticized, et cetera, by our parents, caregivers, and other significant figures in our childhood. Why is it worse for us? More negative feedback. If there was an adult parent in the household, an ADHD parent in the household, there's a higher likelihood there was alcohol, as in my case, or other mental illnesses, and the possibility of physical or emotional abuse, which was my case. Not a healthy recipe for healthy feedback as a child. Later on, our social interactions, peer relationships, the popularity, the quality of our friendships, romantic relationships, particularly our teen and young adult years, any social feedback contributes to how we view ourselves. And it's worse for us because we not only get negative social feedback due to our behaviors and often being seen as different, but also because from the get-go we see ourselves as being different. That puts a magnifying glass on any perceived negative social feedback. Then there are life events, successes and failures. Achieving personal and professional goals can, of course, boost self-esteem, while setbacks and failures do the opposite. Major life changes like job loss, divorce, health problems can really slam self-esteem. Why is it worse for us? We'll likely have more extreme negative events than the average Joe or Jane. And then mental health conditions such as depression and anxiety can significantly impact self-esteem. It's worse for us because with ADHD, as most of you probably know, we're more likely to have a comorbid health condition, mental health condition. And finally, there's our own self-talk, the way we talk to ourselves, our stories. And we're going to come back to this. Most importantly, these are the stories we maintain about ourselves. I want you to put a pin in that because this is where we're going. And it's worse for us ADHDers because we're preloaded for more intense cognitive distortions, which Anthony L. Rostaine, MD, describes as seeing events, situations, and yourself through a negative lens, shaping how you move through the world and amplifying anxiety and negative thinking. So they can reinforce our self-esteem. The granddaddy of all cognitive distortions is the negativity bias. This is what everyone is subject to, but it's worse for us because we might actually have a disproportionate number of negative things happen in our average week. Another common cognitive distortion is black and white thinking. As coach and author Caroline McGuire puts it, thinking in absolutes, right, wrong, smart, stupid, etc., helps a stressed or overstimulated brain make sense of the world. And this black and white thinking is not healthy, and it's particularly worse for our ADHD friends. There's the spotlight effect, where we overestimate how much others pay attention to us, notice our actions, our appearance, our mistakes, which is way worse for us because we've so often been in the spotlight and been noticed. And there's a higher degree of nearly all other cognitive distortions, from catastrophizing, emotional reasoning, which results, of course, in emotional dysregulation, and so on. So to that I say, yikes. Now, with all this, it's easy to see how our ADHD past forms an inner voice that is distorted, mostly critical, sometimes self-abusive, and has both shaped and reinforces our negative limiting stories. Now, I realize that so far, this is not exactly the feel-good webinar of the year, but when we get to those simple solutions, we'll be working on fixing those stories. And one more important thing, though, is to take a quick look at how our self-esteem manifests and what it costs us in our everyday lives. Trying to keep up, trying to stay organized, et cetera, trying to beat perfectionism. So as discussed, our negativity bias is kind of on steroids. We put a magnifying glass on every one of our mistakes, and we almost completely ignore our successes. The cost: perceiving only a track record of fails, we further reinforce all of our negative stories. And we don't expect successes, which reduces motivation and exacerbates our procrastination. Another manifestation, we protect ourselves, that's in quotation marks, with perfectionism, fed by an underlying feeling that, this is the quote, the great Brene Brown, if I look perfect, live perfect, and work perfect, I can avoid criticism, blame, or ridicule, all things we're extraordinarily sensitive to. But when we're practicing any degree of harmful perfectionism, we subconsciously keep our world small and our possibilities fewer. Another manifestation, we also protect ourselves by not taking risks. To quote Brene Brown again, you can't do anything brave wearing a straitjacket of what will people think. The cost, of course, is not taking risks. Not only results in missed opportunities, we don't get the learning that comes from taking the risks and making some of those mistakes. And furthering our procrastination, our self-doubt and perfectionism make tasks seem more monumental than they are. So we procrastinate not just on our toughest tasks, but on things that actually aren't so tough. Another manifestation, we don't feel we deserve things. And not just things, but we don't feel we deserve personal boundaries or to express our own needs. As a result, we say, what do? We say yes, yes, yes to others. And we say no to booking our special vacation, to upgrading our living situation, to delegating things to others, to asking for help, etc. So here's a big manifestation. We don't live to our values. We don't live our values. So we don't do what's right for us, but we do what keeps us safe from judgment. In sum, we're kind of self-sabotaging in so many areas of our life. If you think about it, we're unwittingly screwing ourselves on a daily basis. Now, I don't mean to put it all on us, but this is the net effect, right? And again, I know this all paints a bleak picture, so bear with me while I just put one little more research-backed bit of icing on this cake of woe with a quote from two experts in the area. Lowered self-esteem is associated with lower quality of life, more psychological difficulties, lower job satisfaction, lower relationship satisfaction, lower life satisfaction, and higher risk of suicidal ideation. So all things, by the way, all the above, also associated with ADHD on its own. Double whammy. All right. So what do we do about our destructive self-esteem situation? Well, believe it or not, we've already done a lot just in the last 19 minutes or so, because everything I've shared so far, by just shining a light on the causes, the manifestations, and the costs of our low self-esteem is the first step in the path to improve self-esteem. That's why I spent so much time on these things, so I hope you'll forgive me. Every life-improving shift begins with a keener awareness of the problem. There's something called Kydland's Law, which states, if you can describe a problem clearly, it is halfway solved. I know it's a little optimistic, but now we're going to roll up our sleeves and get at the other halfway, if you will, which is to recognize our limiting stories. Jim Lair is a world-renowned sports performance psychologist and a mental coach to at least 17 athletes ranked #1 in the world. And he notes that, quote, just about everything we say publicly and privately to ourselves is a story. And these stories help us make sense of the world and our place in it. But sometimes, he says, our stories limit us. And this is really important because our stories have a preference for making sense in terms of what's already been loaded into our brains, which is our past. The implication, says Lair, is that if we get information that might somehow contradict one of these negative stories that's already in here, we tend to ignore it. We'll stick with the old story, which, as we've discussed, will contribute to our self-sabotage. So bottom line, our inner voice and the stories it maintains determines our destiny. Hence, we must change those old stories. And I'll give you a quick illustration of the power of a story and of changing it from research on first-generation college students, those whose parents did not go to college. As described, and this is described in Daniel M. Cable's book, Exceptional. Many studies show that students whose parents didn't go to college are more likely to fail and drop out. But the problem is not intellectual ability. The problem is the story they tell themselves about themselves. First generation students often feel they don't deserve to attend college and that they're especially likely to feel left out socially. Can you say feeling different? So the researchers helped a group of first generation students develop a different narrative. They were taught how, for instance, their class backgrounds can be both a challenge and a strength. They learned how their different life experiences were valuable in classroom discussions, and they learned that it was normal for them to rely on their advisors more than other students. At the end of the first year of college, the GPA of most first-generation students was, as is the norm, significantly below those whose parents had attended college. However, for those students who developed a more productive story about their differences, there was no such achievement gap. These positive story students were more likely to meet with professors and to seek extra help from peers. They not only performed better, but they also reported less anxiety and better adjustment to college compared to the first generation students who did not alter their stories about themselves. So, how can we change ours? And I'm going to take a sip of water. This brief pause. So, how can we change our stories? As promised, we're going to look at two simple evidence-based exercises that can help change our limiting stories and strengthen our self-esteem. And you'll need a special workbook to do these. There it is. There's your special workbook. All right. Yes. You want to have a pen and a pad because we're gonna go into each of these just very, very briefly, just to get the ball rolling. And you'll okay. So let me set the stage here. I'm going to share some research to the aforementioned Daniel M. Cable at the London Business School about how our brains use stories. Echoing Jim Lair, Cable says, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are tend to be based on our past, right? Same as Lair is saying. And those stories are served up by existing neural linkages to those stories. Something happens, there's a neural linkage or a neural network, as Lair calls it. There's a linkage ready to serve up a distorted story of what happened. Someone doesn't call you back right away. Cue the neural linkage with the imaginary horrible reason why. Challenging task, there's a neural linkage to a disempowering story that triggers fear, self-doubt, and the need for perfectionism. And we will continue to default to those stories until we change the supporting neural linkages. And here's what's really cool. We can strengthen the linkage between our self-image and positive descriptors that we have of ourselves so that they come to mind more quickly than the currently automatic negative descriptors from the past. And as Cable says, these linkages are stronger or weaker depending how often we use them. Key concept here, how often we use them. I'm going to come back to this when I talk about how to make these two exercises really work for us, really have a real result. For instance, Cable notes, you have no problem associating Nike with Just Do It because you've made that association so many times in your life thanks to Nike's marketing. Our brains, he says, and our memory are like muscles. And the more often we associate ourselves with, did I skip ahead? Yes, sorry. Now I skipped ahead. All right. So the more often we associate ourselves with positive rather than negative descriptors, the stronger those positive linkages get, and the less we'll be subject to that habitual negative linkage that holds us back. Now, let me just say one thing in no uncertain terms. The methodologies I'm sharing here are not rah-rah cheerleading. It's not, yay, you get a trophy. It's not, you're good enough, smart enough, and doggone it, people like you. It's all well supported in the research. Okay, so just if you're getting a little bit of, oh, he's going to do some aspirational thing, that's not where we're going. And where we're going is supported very well in the research. So to start building this muscle, that Cable refers to. Number one, we identify and write, I'm going to emphasize that word many times here, positive self-descriptors, right? The second thing we do is we use those positive self-descriptors to create positive new stories. And then three, we employ simple practices to remind us, the repetition of, and reinforce those new stories. All right, so let's get to those two simple writing exercises to strengthen our self-esteem. The first has been around for a long time. I'm going to attribute it to David Gewirtz, the founder of the ADD Coach Academy, mentor of mine. He teaches us similar exercises in coach training. And it's called, I call it the 7 stories. That's how I learned about it first. So the 7 stories, and it's designed to call up your positive traumatic events. What is a positive traumatic event? Well, most of the research on trauma and its impact focuses on negative traumas, right? When we, of course, associate the word trauma with the most negative of life events, combat, assault, major illness or loss, physical or emotional abuse, et cetera. But there are also positive traumas. You'll never forget the feeling of falling in love. It's a big positive traumatic event. Having your first child, big traumatic, positive traumatic event. And a positive trauma can be when you got a promotion or an award, but they don't have to be big. They can be any accomplishment or positive moment of pride from childhood right up to last week. So recalling positive traumatic events can help us shift out of negative stories and into positive enabling ones. The 7 stories can help you identify your greatest hits of positive traumatic events. Now, you want to set aside an hour or so of quiet time to do this. It's a 4-step exercise, but I invite you to start writing now just for step one, which is to write a list of about 20 to 25 of the things you're most proud of. All the moments where you achieved something meaningful, maybe against the odds, all the times when you felt you were kind of in flow or really aligned with your passion and your strengths, etc. These can be from any time in your life, and in fact should be from a wide range of your life stages. And I'm going to set a timer just to get the ball rolling here. I'm going to set a timer for 90 seconds, and I'll just let you get started on this. Okay, go. Maybe there was a risk that you took that you're proud of. Could be something you did as a kid that you're proud of. Remember, big, small, anywhere in between. Did you learn to play an instrument and get half decent at it? Did you help another person in a big way, or did you do some volunteer work? Maybe you quit smoking. Maybe you're in recovery. You badasses out there. Big, small, anywhere in between. Thirty seconds left. Okay. Pencils down, no more writing, as I share the final 3 steps. Again, that's just to get your brain going on it. Once you've listed 25 or so, and you're going to do this at another time, step 2 is to review all those positive events and circle your top 7, hence the 7 stories. And you circle those in terms of their impact, the pride that you had, any other criteria you deem relevant. And then step 3 is for each of the 7, you write a short paragraph of about 3 sentences, and you want to take a screenshot here. So 3 sentences that describe what you did, what skills, strengths, or values you called on to achieve it, and why you are so proud of it. That's absolutely critical here. And then step 4, you'll step back and using a highlighter, Look for patterns. By the way, remember, you're doing this by handwriting, and I'm going to talk about that again in a second. Handwriting, not typing, ideally. You'll step back using a highlighter. You'll look for patterns, words or phrases that come up repeatedly, any other themes that you can spot. And in those patterns, you will see strengths of yours across these multiple events that you might have kind of forgotten about or that you didn't even know about. And you'll see some of your core values. This is powerful because when you shine the spotlight of your attention on your strengths and values, several things start to happen. You see direct, credible evidence refuting some of your disempowering beliefs. You create new beliefs about what you're capable of, and you will begin to form new neural linkages or pathways that support your new, more positive narrative, particularly if you revisit them regularly. Yeah, I'm going to come back to this when we wrap up. Okay, the second empowering writing exercise is from that Jim Lehrer, the world-renowned sports mindset coach. This is a very well-researched, proven methodology, and it's best illustrated with his example of a pro golfer he worked with who hated putting. Yet he knew that if he could be a great putter, he could be at the top of the PGA Tour. But the story the golfer told himself was, I just don't seem to have the ability to be a good putter. I have always had trouble putting, and this is my greatest weakness. And Laird tells him, you can't get where you want to go with that limiting story. Here's the new story that will work for you. And this is in the voice of the golfer. All right, bear with me. If I look at my stats, I am one of the poor putters on the PGA Tour. That's true. But I'm an athlete. And I have to tell you, one day I'm going to become one of the best putters, if not the best putter on tour. And I'll tell you why. Because I'm going to devote more energy and more effort to it. And I'm going to make this the most important part of my game. Again, instead of shying away from it, he's going to make it the most important part of his game. And I'm going to love doing it, he says. And every time I see a green, I'm going to light up and say, fantastic. I have another chance to practice my putting and to get it right. Tons of research around just that little thought there I won't get into. And if I miss a putt, even an easy 3-footer for a birdie, I'll simply say, thank God I got that out of my system. Now I'm going to get better. Right? As Laird says, this story rewriting is classic growth mindset, right? Versus a fixed mindset. You develop a kind of running narrative with yourself that builds confidence and belief. And I've got a group coaching client right now who's using this technique to boost her confidence after having been fired from 3 consecutive jobs and needing to kick butt in her newest job. And she's succeeding. To demonstrate how you, a non-pro athlete, can use this exercise, I'm going to provide a more specific example for another group coaching client and her struggle to maintain her ideal diet and a push into work projects with less perfectionism and more confidence. So step one was to articulate her current disempowering story, right? Hers was, in social situations, I don't adhere to my healthy diet guidelines because I feel overly conscious in public. I worry about being seen as different and therefore judged. So I go with the flow, which I then regret, not just because I've eaten unhealthy foods, but because I'm violating my value of showing up for me. And that is a core value of hers, which we uncovered earlier in an exercise like the 7 stories. So here is her new enabling story that she wrote. I haven't been great about showing up for myself, which is a core value of mine. But because it is a core value and because I know it can help me succeed in better self-care, better job performance, and more, I am going to be someone who lives that value forcefully. So whenever I'm invited to a social gathering or handed a tricky, highly visible project at work, I'm going to light up and say, here's an opportunity to live that core value of me showing up for me. And on those occasions where I slip back into worrying about what others will think or being perfectionist at work, I'll make a note of it. I'll dust myself off and be grateful for the reminder that, hey, I'm not quite there yet, but I'm going to get there. Right? Pretty good news story, right? And again, this is not woo-woo. This is not rah-rah. But you might be, Alan, can I really, as Laird says, develop a running narrative with myself that builds confidence and belief? And yes, again, this methodology is not a bunch of rah-rah stuff. It's deeply researched and done right. It will help you strengthen your self-esteem. And in a sec, I'll share simple ways to help ensure real results, as I mentioned before. Now, obviously, we don't have time to do this exercise here, but maybe if you got your pad and your pen, maybe you just start thinking about what might be a couple of your disempowering stories, and just go ahead and maybe start writing one or two of yours right now. I know a couple of mine for sure, and I work on them every day. But see if you can just start jotting something down. And while you're thinking and writing, I'm just going to share this next critical piece. And I'm going to quote Lair again. You will start that running narrative by crafting your new story with your hand, because it's more powerful to do it by hand than on a computer. Some of you have heard this research before, but much more powerful than doing it on a computer, let alone just trying to do it up here in your mind. So Lair says, quote, with thousands of case studies, we researched every possible way of editing our story. We tried visualization. We tried all kinds of ways of changing the way people actually process thinking and thought over a period of time. And what we finally concluded was that your hand writing had the greatest impact on the way in which these neural networks or neural linkages formed and were changed. By the way, Lair's findings are supported by tons of other research as well. Writing by hand is absolutely key to making any such exercise actually take hold and create change in your life by actually changing your neural networks around your story. So wherever you left off and jotting down some limiting beliefs, please make a note in your calendar right now to use the examples of the PGA golfer and my group coaching client to rewrite just one of those limiting stories. All right. Together, these two exercises will help you become more confident in yourself, and to quote a frequent author on self-esteem, Carolyn McGuire, whom I mentioned earlier, the past stories will start to fall away. And it's not instant, but with practice, you will start to see more of the good in yourself and your stories will change. Now, I'm all about taking action on and getting results from things we've learned in a webinar like this. So here are some tips on getting real results from these exercises, because these exercises don't create any change by just doing them once and then moving on. So obviously, we need to set appointments with ourselves to work on just one of the two exercises. I suggest starting with the 7 stories, and do that right now. Put something in your calendar right now. And remember, in addition to writing by hand, we got to maintain ongoing exposure to our positive stories in order to start crowding out the negatives. And so here are a few simple mnemonic devices to help maintain that frequent exposure to your positive stories. First, put a recurring reminder in your calendar, even if just once a month, to revisit your notes from one or both of these exercises. You'll likely find yourself adding new things to them, which is a great thing. But on a more frequent basis, here are some simple ways to remind yourself of key positive stories. This is going to sound crazy, but pick a tree near your home, one that you see every time you go out the door. Maybe it's your favorite tree, or for some reason, or it could just be a bush or even a fire hydrant. And then associate it with a positive story. And every time you see it, you'll be reminded of that story. And if you then pause and give it a little thought, you'll be strengthening that linkage, strengthening that story. So it will come up in your mind more quickly than the old story. Change some of your passwords to something that reminds you of a positive story or important value. One of my group coaching clients changed his computer password, which he uses many times a day, to "I am a great dad." Put a few stories or values on differently colored stickies. Not too many. Put them where you'll see them every day: bathroom mirror, car dashboard, etc. Here's one that I learned from the aforementioned David Gawork. Another tip, the founder of ADCA, says, identify one or more symbols of your strengths and/or core values. Maybe it's a tchotchke or a little statue, or even just a sticky with a killer note on it. Put them in your workspace so you're seeing them every time you're working. All right, in closing, I'll share some wise words from yet another researcher in this field regarding the power of our stories. Don McAdams, a professor of psychology at Northwestern, who developed his own story-changing approach, echoes all the other research that I've been sharing. He says, Our stories are the building blocks of how we define ourselves. When we write, and he says write, we make stories into something we are, not just something that has happened to us. It therefore is a process of self-construction, or in this case, reconstruction. We literally are authoring ourselves. That's what this stuff does, and the research supports it. So please take these exercises seriously and start authoring or reauthoring your You 2.0. Now, before we get to Q&A, I want to tell you about my upcoming 4th annual Crush Your ADHD Virtual Summit. Kicks off January 26th. This is a free week-long virtual summit with all the top ADHD thought leaders, including Ari Tuckman, Linda Rogley, Jeff Copper, Brendan Mahan, who's done webinars here with Attitude, Nikki Kinzer, and more. This is totally free. It's totally online, and it starts Monday the 26th. So take a pic of that QR code to learn more and grab your free seat. And even if you're seeing this as a replay after the summit or during the summit, you can still register and get access to the recordings. All right. Thank you. I am ready for your questions.
Thank you, Alan. So many people said this was 100% relatable. It was like holding up a mirror. Other comments were, this resonates big time. I'm 48 and so tired of feeling this way. Another said, I've spent most of my life thinking I don't deserve this or that, or to be happy. So, yeah.
Wow.
Before we start
So
the Q&A,
wonderful.
yeah. So everything you said, it's been a lifelong drag. Before we start the Q&A, I'd like to share the final results from today's poll question. We asked, when anxiety is high and self-talk is harsh and avoidance or overfunctioning is already underway, what has helped you interrupt this cycle in the moment? The top answers were challenging negative thoughts, then practicing self-compassion, and prioritizing your own needs.
Great.
Now to your questions. Someone asks, when I'm feeling angry and the anger is escalating, what helps interrupt the cycle of harsh self-talk and negativity?
Well, I'm gonna respond to that, assuming that the question is about like in the moment, right?
Yes.
It's like when this is happening, like right now. So I'm going to share very briefly a little bit of research, because everything I teach is evidence-based, or at least common sense. But there's been a lot of research done on anxiety in the last couple of decades. But one piece of research, supported by others, talks about what's known as an anxiety loop. So what you're describing is when something happens like that and you go into this self-abuse, the self-doubt, and you sort of get freaked out, and you get tense, right? You get defensive. And what's happening is you're getting anxious, frustrated, or stressed, and you enter into a loop, and you don't even know you're in the loop. You may not even realize it. But here's the neat thing. Once we can recognize that we're in the loop, the loop starts to dissolve. And the way to recognize the loop is to listen to your body. So when this kind of thing is happening that this person describes, we can usually feel some stress in our body. I tend to feel this in my neck and shoulders, or here in my solar plexus. And if we can learn to, why is my neck firing up like this? Then I can go upstairs and go, okay, it must be something upstairs. I see. I am freaked out about the so-and-so thing, or I'm freaked out in this conversation I'm having with my boss. So it takes a little bit of practice, but it's extraordinary that if you just listen to your body and become the witness to the loop, you exit the loop and your cortisol goes down, you restore blood to your frontal cortex, and now you can respond in a more rational way. You can think your way through it, and you can probably have better answers for your boss. So I hope that answered that question. It's a great question.
Another question, how does late diagnosis amplify self-doubt and dysfunction? And how do we grieve the past without getting stuck in it?
So, So late diagnosis means that we have probably done a lot of stuff, not knowing. Obviously, we've made a lot of mistakes, et cetera, without realizing why. And I think a lot of folks need to be able to. So for me, my diagnosis was, wow, now I know why. That wasn't the completion of my self-forgiveness. But I think the thing here is we need some self-compassion. And I won't get into this sort of the cliched stuff about self-compassion. I'll just say that if you can think rationally about it and acknowledge that I did a lot of things because my brain is rewired, not excuses, but explanations. I mean, my mother died when I was a drug addict, and I owed her money. I owed my mother money. I cracked up her car, her love of her. So I've had, and that's just one of many things. So, and this was explained in part by ADHD. I was self-medicating myself. I was in college and I was self-medicating. But look back on whatever you want to look back on. Those are opportunities also, when you go back and look at that, there are opportunities to find disempowering stories that are attached to those things and bring them into one or both of these exercises. But the way to self-forgive is to be rational about it and see where there's a connection to your ADHD or maybe to some trauma that you had when you were younger, and just view it as that and maybe write that out. Hey, I hated myself because I did X, Y, and Z. And then write out what might be a new, slightly more empowering way of viewing that. I struggled with ADHD without knowing it, and I did these things. I hope that helps this person with this wonderful question.
Okay. Communication is incredibly difficult for me because I have so many thoughts all at once. I start talking about one, then my mind goes blank, so I go to a different thought and it gets muddled and confused. This is a huge problem when I talk with my boss. What can I do to help with this?
So I can certainly respond by saying that, exercises like the ones that I've shared can help over the long haul. Because when part of what's happening when you're having difficulty frustrating, particularly in a stressful circumstance, is you are just firing up all the automatically playing linkages, all those stories. They may be in the background, but you're doing those, and it's making you nervous, and it's making you fumble, and it's making you feel horrible. But I'm going to say something much more fundamental that needs to be addressed first. So many of our ADHD peeps, my ADHD peeps, are not doing the three legs of the stool for fueling our brain. And that situation that you described can be helped immediately, if not very, very soon, by proper diet, exercise, and sleep. And I'm not going to lecture anybody. I'm just going to invite everyone to consider where they're at with their diet. If you had to rate yourself 0 to 10 on diet, where 0 is crappy and 10 is, this is where it should be. And do the same on exercise and sleep. And sleep is probably the most important. But if you were to do this 1 to 10, the first number that comes to your mind on each of those categories, and then just circle the lowest score, and then just try to start taking some action on that lowest score, you're going to perform better. You're going to start to perform better in situations like that. But again, it's a near-term thing. It's a more fundamental thing, but it's also that longer-term working on your stories, working on understanding your self-esteem, understanding why you're doing that, and then trying to find the disempowering stories that are coming up that are making you stumble and feel stressed and not be able to, and also dart around with your mind, which is really helped by diet, sleep, exercise.
A lot of parents, or quite a few parents, have asked about how to build self-esteem in their teens who have ADHD. And I want to read a comment to you because I think you'll find this really moving. That dummy thing from your father hit hard. I'm having real trouble with my son, but he is so much like me that it's scary. He's 13 and in a very difficult stage of his life, both because he has ADHD and because he's a teen. And I have called him some unkind things out of frustration and exasperation. Thank you for reminding me that I can't let that take over. I love him so much and he needs a good dad. Thank you for reminding me of that. So I wanted to read that to you and also ask you, what are some things that parents can do to build self-esteem in their children and also kind of self-correct when they find themselves doing
Oof.
this as, as parents, as we all do, and wish we could have do-overs.
Yeah, the do-over is to do it over. The do-over is to, man, I cannot imagine what it would have been like. And my father never really apologized. He sort of did things in little ways that to acknowledge, but he if he had ever sat me down and said, "I'm so sorry I called you dummy. I don't mean that." And also, if the parent, and thank you for sharing that story. Wow. Needs to say that you caught me off guard there. But if you can also relate to your child what it is that you have been suffering, what have you been battling? Wow, that 13-year-old, even at the age of 13, is going to go, wow. And you're going to be role modeling a way to be open, vulnerable, and therefore powerful. I think that's where you go. I think you take it head on. You do a redo. You ask him for a redo. How beautiful would that be? Wow, I wish my father had done that. Thank you for that question.
One of the things someone writes, one of the things I struggle with is promoting myself, such as writing a cover letter or promotion packet. I never know how to describe myself. Do you have guidance for someone who struggles with this? I had a similar question too. It was about when you have to write your self-review at the end of the year, and you have to turn it into your manager. They have a lot of trouble thinking about positive things to say in their self-review. So I guess this stems from low self-esteem.
Yeah, you bet. Again, you think about the negativity bias and how it's a double whammy for us because we're doing more, we may be doing more negative things. But going in and deconstructing that and maybe even listing the things that you might have messed up or whatever that you could have done better on. But make sure you sit and you take the time to list all the things big, because we're in a review situation. We're going to be looking for the big things we did. Screw the big things. Just, they'll come through, but it's the smaller, more regular, more weekly, more everyday things where you can find some victories and some strengths, et cetera. There was another thing that I want to say here. Could you just repeat the first part of the question?
He says he has trouble promoting himself in cover letters.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So here's a trick that I help folks with a lot. I'll just tell you a story. A very dear friend of mine and a co-founder of one of my startups. He's a real hard-headed Sicilian guy. And so he's struggling with being able to write his cover letters. And I just asked him, his name is Joey Spoons, believe it or not. It's his name. His last name is Cucciara, and which means spoons. So Joey, I said, Spoons, here's what I want you to do. I want you to just tell me about yourself in relation to this job. Just tell me. And he goes, yeah, well, so I did this, I did that, I did these, I did boom, 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 bing, bang, ding, bang. He's from the Bronx. And I said, great. Now go write that down. So one of the things that happens when we're writing is that we are staring at what we've written, and it becomes, we're judging the last sentence we wrote while we're trying to write the news. There's all kinds of stuff. So I really truly invite people to just turn on your recorder on your phone and just start talking, and or into a transcription or into ChatGPT, and just because it will come out if you just talk about, well, this is what I've done that, I've done this, here's the blah blah blah, and you could write a resume more powerfully with that. So that's my advice on writing about yourself.
Okay. Someone writes, I have trouble with executive functioning, of course, and I hear a lot of criticism because of it, albeit by well-meaning but poorly informed individuals. What should I say to people to interrupt or counter their criticism?
It's a great question, and I think it depends on the circumstance. So, when I'm working with, and I run my own company now, and so when I'm dealing with my virtual assistants, and I've got a handful of them spread out around the planet, And I'm often in a log jam. I'm often giving mistaken instructions, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just really upfront about the fact that I have ADHD. And one of the things that I do is I invite the people around me to spot the things that I've missed. Help me out, man, because they see the value in me also. But for the it's much worse if we are masking and we're pretending this stuff doesn't happen. Now, I realize that in, for instance, a corporate environment, you might not be able to say, hey, boss, you know me and the ADHD. And I do not recommend seeking, and this is what Ned Hollowell says also, he does not recommend going and seeking unless you absolutely have to an accommodation. But what you can do is try to identify some things that would help you a little bit in the workplace and see if you can arrange to get those things, get some flexibility in ways that would help you without necessarily making an Americans with Disabilities Act claim for accommodation. Just find the thing that will help you. And another thing you can do with your peers and the people around is encourage them, again, to help you with it, hey, would you remind me about so-and-so? Be upfront about it to the extent that you can.
Someone asked, how do I catch perfectionism and simply ask when enough is enough? I'm trying to draw the line between that.
Yes. So that's the $64,000 question, or for those of you who are younger than me, the $1 million question. Some of you, thank you, Carol, for getting that reference. But yeah, this is classic. Look. Here's what I do, and I'm going to drop an S-bomb here. I'll do it differently. But the first thing is perfectionism prevents us from starting. Right? Let's say that we're writing an email response that's really tricky, right? Or that cover letter, or just something that requires some real thought. The key is a crappy first draft. Just write crap. I call it barf it out. Just barf out poop. That's literally I say to myself, get it out into the form or the whatever it is you're typing into. Get it out there so you can see it and see the various parts. That helps with perfectionism a lot, because what we're trying to do when we're writing, for instance, or thinking about a complex issue that we're trying to be perfect about, is we're trying to do it all up in here, and then we're also trying to do the perfect thing and make it better. Those two things are very difficult on their own. So if you can split those two things, get stuff out in front of you, crappy as you like, and just then you step back and go, okay, how bad is this? Now let me fix this. This goes here, that goes there. And then we get to the point where, how do we know when good enough is good enough? That's the really tricky part. But here's what I do for myself. And I'm not as bad as I used to be, but I've had to work on it. I go for a B-. I look for a B-. If I've written a blog and it's like, oh man. And another cool thing is when you are trying to make something better and you don't have any idea how to make it better, that's a good sign of perfectionist tendencies coming in there, right? But if you see something that's blatantly not working, then you go and you fix that. But I go for the B-. And guess what? When I go for the B-, I end up with a B+, and it gets out into the world. And I can spend more time working on the next thing. So there's my shtick on perfectionism. Great question.
I like the B- because it sort of takes the pressure off, or some of the pressure off.
Yes, totally.
And then the last question is time management. Time blindness is absolutely crushing me at work. Do you have some suggestions?
Yes, I do. So I love this topic. So I hope I've got a minute or so to do this. Hope we're not. But so a problem with time blindness with us is that I'm going to take the example of being late all the time, right? This is a classic thing. I'm late all the time, and I'm late by varying amounts, and it's just, oh, there we go, I'm late again. One of the reasons that we're late all the time is because we don't think we're going to be late. We don't, right? I mean, it's 20 minutes before you got to be there. You know it takes 15 minutes to get there at least, but you go, I won't be late. I still got 20 minutes. And then you engage in something, and now you've only got 10 minutes. And now you end up, coming up with an excuse, oh, the traffic, da, da, da. So here's what I do. I do what I call WWGW. What will go wrong? And so what I do is, and so for instance, I'm going to Mexico City next week for a few days, celebrate a friend's birthday. And what I do is I write down all the things that will go wrong. I write them on a sticky and I put them on the folder for that trip. I'm pretty organized when it comes to travel, only because I've been burned so many times. All right. So I identify, I'm not going to have my bag at the front door when it's time to go, head out. So I make note of that. If let's say it's going to pick up my daughter, on a regular basis, and most of the time I'm late, I'm going to identify what will go wrong. Traffic will be more than I think. There will be a car accident somewhere. I will not account for the fact that I need to find a parking space, or that I need to walk out of the house, get in the car before the driving even starts. All this stuff, if you can just sort of identify what will go wrong, and always assume I'm going to be late. I am going to be late. It's not self-fulfilling prophecy, but when you have that level of honesty and awareness, now you can fight it. If you decide instead to stay in the time blindness and say, no, I won't be late. No, I'm going to try to be on time this time. But you're still stuck with I won't be late. I got time. You're going to be late. So be okay saying I'm going to be late unless I identify what will go wrong. That's my loving shtick on time blindness.
Okay. Well, that has to be our last question because we're out of time. Alan, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience. It's been fabulous. Very actionable strategies that I hope people will benefit from. And thank you to everyone here today. If you have ideas for future attitude webinars, please share them in the comment box or email us at customerservice@attitudemag.com. If you would like to access the event resources, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 593. The slides and recording are posted a few hours after each live webinar. If you're listening in replay mode, simply click on the episode description. Please know that our full library of attitude webinars is available as a podcast. It's called the ADHD Experts podcast, and it's available on most streaming platforms. We hope to see you again next Tuesday for our webinar with Melissa Orlov called Is Resentment Poisoning Your Relationship? Learn how to root out its source and move forward. Make sure you don't miss future attitude webinars, articles, or research updates by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. Thanks, everyone.